If you've watched my other reviews, you'll know that a long time ago I reviewed a Nintendo 64 game called Batman Beyond Return of the Joker, a massively crappy beat-em-up game licensed on an awesome movie that was based off the awesome Batman Beyond animated series, the science fiction follow-up to the original Batman animated series that continues to have a large fan base to this day. The Nintendo 64 game was the single most lazily made game that I had ever seen in my life. At least it was before I played Titanic Mystery. I mean, sweet crap. No voice acting, not even an ugh whenever someone gets punched. Lousy and broken combat where your only attacks on combos are punch, 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 and kick, 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 kick. The game completely butchers the excellent story of the movie, and the game can be beaten in just over a half hour without even trying to do a speed run. But what made the Nintendo 64 game hurt even worse is that it was the only Batman Beyond game that was ever made. Batman Beyond has popped up as an alternate costume in Arkham City, Injustice, and Justice League Heroes, but Return of the Joker is the only game he has to himself. It's just such a disappointment. But there's one more Batman Beyond game for me to try out. Batman Beyond Return of the Joker on the Game Boy Color. This is my last hope for a good Batman Beyond game, and the warning signs are not promising. I bought this game used on Amazon, and guess how much I had to pay for it? Go on, guess. Not counting shipping and handling, this game cost me 25 cents. Somebody wanted rid of this game so badly that they sold it to me for $1.25. Oh, and one more thing, never ever listen to Amazon's customer reviews because there are 8 reviews of the Nintendo 64 game on Amazon. 3 of them are 5 out of 5 ratings. I quote, "Best superhero game ever made." That statement is so fundamentally wrong that trying to comprehend it would be like trying to divide by 0. Please don't suck. Please don't suck. Please don't suck. Well, right off the bat, the Game Boy version's music is better than the Nintendo 64 version, and the graphics are better too. I'm not being facetious, I really think that. The game's environments are all pretty colorful, and the game is very visually appealing to look at. Plus, for a Game Boy Color game, the animation on Batman is pretty fluid. My only complaint about the graphics is that the game's color palette is a bit dark. This is a Batman game after all, and that makes it a little harder to see what you're doing if you're not in a well-lit room. This isn't a problem these days since we have Game Boy Advance SPs with backlit screens, but for those of you who have played a classic Game Boy, you probably know how annoying it is trying to play one of those without a direct light source. Story-wise, the game follows the exact same structure as the Nintendo 64 version. It has the same 5 levels, it has the same dialogue, with one minor addition in the Arkham Asylum level where one of the Jokers talks about how batshit insane the original Batman villains were, and it has mostly the same cutscenes with a few minor changes to the still images used. For example, the Joker's weird bug-eyed rape face is substituted with an image from the movie. The game is a pretty standard beat-em-up for the most part. You run through a stage until you run into enemies, and you punch people in the head until you're allowed to proceed. For some bizarre reason, enemies only come on screen 2 at a time, and a new one comes in after an enemy has been knocked out. I have no idea why they designed both games like this, since most beat-em-ups are built around enemies swarming and overpowering you, and limiting the game to 2 enemies pretty much defangs the main challenge that most beat-em-up games are built around. Granted, the 2 enemy limit makes sense since this is a Game Boy game and those aren't as technically advanced as console games, but it's still weird. What's kind of a neat feature is that enemies spawn in after you get spotted by an enemy, and if you knock out a bad guy before he sees you, you can avoid fights altogether. Of course, just because you can does not mean that you will, because I swear the enemies have eyes in the back of their heads sometimes. What, has Batman not showered in a few days and the bad guy could smell me coming? How did that guy see me? Unlike the Nintendo 64 game, which revolved around having 4 suits with different abilities to switch between, the Game Boy game instead has gadgets that you can pick up and equip one at a time. You've got 5 items: the magnetic nunchucks, batarangs, jet boots, the Dark Knight staff, and shields. The nunchucks and staff deal a ton of damage, and the shields protect you from damage if you're facing the enemy that's attacking you, but the batarangs and jet boots are pretty much useless. You pick up batarangs in groups of 3, but they don't actually hit enemies unless the enemy you're throwing at is exactly horizontal from your position, which almost never happens. Also, I don't know why they insist on calling the batarangs discus in this and the Nintendo 64 game, but at least in the Game Boy version the batarangs actually look like the batarangs from the show. The jet boots allow you to jump all the way to the ceiling, but the only level where that ability even remotely comes in handy is the final level, and it seems like every time I try to use the jet boots I hit my head on the ceiling. And the game's collision detection when you're using the boots is not very good, so the game will think you hit the ceiling even when you didn't. And rocket jumping into the ceiling isn't nearly as amusing as when Iron Man does it. Also, each item disappears from your inventory after you use it a certain number of times, and the jet boots disappear after you use them once! The game's combat is pretty straightforward. You punch, you jump, you do flying kicks. The controls are responsive, and that's often the most you can ask for in these kinds of games. But there's one big problem that comes close to ruining the game. Dying has almost no consequences. You get 3 lives. If you lose them, you get a game over. But you have unlimited continues, and if you continue, you spawn at the start of the room where you died. And trust me, the game is not so difficult that crossing one room without losing all of your lives is ever an issue. So being sent back to the start of a room is just a momentary inconvenience. Getting killed doesn't have any consequences aside from losing your items and a few minutes of your personal time. This is a lesson that all game developers need to learn. Games are not as stimulating if I know that I can screw up as much as I want and not get punished for it. The game needed either limited continues, which I guess the password feature would have made pointless, or the enemies needed to be a lot stronger so that I'm required to put in some effort if I want to win. But what really messes up the game's combat system is that enemies do not get knocked back when you punch them. If you run up to an enemy and start mashing the B button, that enemy will flinch continuously and be rendered completely immobile until you finish punching his lights out. Same thing happens to you if an enemy manages to get a hit on you. Most of the enemies can launch attacks so fast that they'll either stun lock you or you'll lose a ton of health trying to get away from them. Combat in this game pretty much boils down to seeing who can stun lock the other guy first, and it pretty much reduces the game's combat to just mashing one button over and over again. You can even stun lock 2 enemies at once if you get both enemies on the screen to one side of you. A lot of the enemies have guns and can shoot projectiles at you, but rather than attacking you with their gun, they move forward to melee attack you and shoot maybe once or twice on the way over. Because I don't know about you, but when somebody hands me a high-tech laser cannon and tells me to go kill someone, my first thought is, I'm gonna deck him in the schnoz. The first level of the game is Gotham Air and Space, and the only enemies in this level that require effort to defeat are the mini-boss, a crane machine that you have to run like hell to dodge, and Bonk, who sends out shockwaves that you have to dodge. These fights require you to maneuver, get a few punches in, and dodge attacks. You know, like good beat-em-up games require you to do, rather than just run up and mash B until bad guy fall down. The second level of the game is Wayne Enterprises. Now, the first time that I played this level, I spent something like 20 minutes wandering around this level trying to figure out where the hell I was supposed to go. The first room in this level has 2 elevators that take you to different parts of the level. It's kind of cool because it means there are multiple paths through the stage, but the problem is, let's say that you go to a floor and you find that it has 3 elevators. One is the one you just came from, one leads further into the level, and one leads backwards through one of the other paths that leads through the level, and all 3 elevators look exactly the same. Because of the way the elevators are laid out, and because several rooms look quite similar to one another, it is very possible to walk in giant circles through this level and not even realize that you're doing it. There are no indications of what floor you're on, and no indication if you're making progress, especially since most of the rooms look a lot alike, so there's no way to know that you're going backwards. It doesn't help that if you accidentally circle around the level and come back to a room you've already visited, the enemies respawn, which tricks you into thinking you're making progress when you're really just doing laps. Does the elevator not have buttons that let you pick which floor to go on? Do elevators in the future not have a little sign next to them indicating what floor you're on? I'm just trying to think of a scenario where Batman would get lost in this building. Wayne Enterprises! The mini-boss of the level is some kind of a security robot, and this guy is indicative of everything that is wrong with the combat, because you can stun lock him very easily and kill him in a few seconds before he even gets a single shot at you. The boss of the level is Wolf, and because he spends more time running away from you than actually trying to attack you, this fight is a lot more annoying than actually difficult. The third level of the game is Arkham Asylum, and this is the first time that you get some use out of the game's platforming. Pretty much the only thing that keeps the game from just being a monotonous button masher is the game's platforming. Each level is full of obstacles that deal a ton of damage to you, and the Asylum and the Candy Factory levels require you to jump between platforms to progress instead of running through simple hallways. The controls are fluid and responsive, and it's fun to go running and gliding around levels, but aside from jumping a gap or maybe gliding over some obstacles, platforming just isn't an integral part of the game. The one interesting part of the game, the platforming, running, and jumping mechanics, go almost completely unused. The mini-boss of the Asylum is a Mr. Freeze robot, which I admit made me fangasm because I love Mr. Freeze. Come to think of it, it really would have been cool if you had to fight enemies using gadgetry from a bunch of old Batman villains, and the game kind of hints that's what you're going to do in one of the dialogues, but all you see is the Mr. Freeze droid in a few rooms with Riddler question marks on the walls. What a waste of potential. The boss of the Asylum is Ghoul, who runs to one side of the screen, fires a wave of shots at you, runs to the other side, and then shoots again. Fortunately, Mr. Ghoul is allergic to boots to the head, and he goes down pretty easily also. If I may nitpick the story though, because remember Batman Beyond never visits the Asylum in the movie, at the start of this level, Bruce tells Terry not to bother going to the Asylum because there's nothing there worth checking into. So how come when Batman runs into several Jokers infesting the Asylum, he doesn't immediately call Bruce back and say, "I told you so"? and at the end of the level, Terry returns to the Batcave and sees Bruce lying on the ground after being attacked by the Joker, which is a pivotal scene from the movie. But if the Joker was at the asylum during this whole level, when did he have time to go to the Batcave? He couldn't have done it before the level starts because why would the Jokers be there if the Joker wasn't there? And he couldn't have done it after the level because I doubt whatever clown car the Joker is using for transportation is faster than the Batmobile, let alone fast enough for the Joker to get to the cave, attack Bruce, trash the cave, and escape before Terry gets back.
You've created a time paradox.
Level 4 is Tim Drake's laboratory, and just like the Nintendo 64 game, there are no enemies in this level. Instead, the level is 3 rooms where you have to jump kick a few sentry guns while missiles fly out of the floor. Also, much like the Nintendo 64 game, this level takes about 2 minutes to complete. Go figure, the first interesting level in the game where you do something other than mash B is over in a couple of minutes. And if I may nitpick the story some more, Batman doesn't confront Drake and find out that he's working for the Joker until after you go through the rooms with the guns. Let's suppose that Tim Drake was in his lab at the time and he didn't know that Batman was on to him working with the Joker. Wouldn't it have been awkward trying to explain to Batman why several sentry guns and missile launchers tried to murder-death-kill him the instant he set foot inside the lab? Brilliant! So the final level of the game is the Jolly Jack Candy Factory. This is far and away the best level in the game because all of the enemies have a ton of health, which means you won't be able to stun lock and kill one enemy before another one comes by to fight you, and you're required to actually maneuver around enemies if you don't want to get stomped to death. Plus, all of the groups that you run into this stage have a ton of enemies that all have guns, which makes this level a marathon and the only level with any degree of difficulty. However, because the game has infinite continues and you respawn at the start of a room if you happen to die, the difficulty is, again, very muted. Oh, and I found an extra life one time when I was playing this level. The only extra life that I ever found in the game. Weird. Wait a second, did that guy just walk off the stage and fall to his death? And there goes another one! Wow, I have never seen a game where the AI willingly killed themselves. Not since Yu-Gi-Oh! World Championship 2004, and man was that game a pile of suck. What is this? The Joker's crack Suicide Squad? That guy must have just played Batman Dark Tomorrow. Oh my god! Come on, stop killing yourselves, guys. This is getting sad. I mean, there are 3 things that the AI needs to do. Walk towards Batman, attack Batman, and don't walk off cliffs. Jeez! Okay, in all seriousness, in Alien vs. Predator Classic 2000, one of the Predator's levels takes place in a prison from Alien 3, and one time when I was playing that level I saw an alien crawl into the molten lead and kill himself. I cut that accident some slack because the alien AI is meant to be chaotic and the game just made a little mistake, but still, that was one enemy, one time that I played the level, not 20 enemies every time that I play the level. Either A, nobody tested this game, or B, when the testers came back and reported that the AI is glitched to commit mass suicide, the developer said, "Sweet, ship it out!" I mean, the game takes an hour and a half to complete. Testing would not have taken very long. How the hell do you miss this? Come on, we're almost to 30. Yes! The Candy Factory has 2 mini-bosses, Choco and the Dee Dee sisters. What the crap? I can't punch. Why can't I punch? Is the game bugging out or something? I'll try using nunchucks, maybe that'll fix the bug. I can't use nunchucks either. Oh, I get it. The Dee Dee sisters take damage every time they step on the spikes, so you just run around until they step on the spikes enough times that they die. How many times do these dumb bitches have to impale themselves on spikes before they realize, hey, maybe we should stop doing that? I just can't believe this. Now there's an entire boss fight built around getting the enemies to commit suicide. Anyway, eventually you run into the Joker, and unlike the Nintendo 64 game, I know this fight is going to be more epic than Yugi vs. Kaiba, more epic than Harry Potter vs. Voldemort, more epic than the Flea vs. the Masked Toilet. Let's do this! And he's dead. After 5 seconds. Yeah, if you have the shield, this fight becomes a joke because the Joker won't be able to touch you. And you will have a shield because the game literally hands you one right before you enter the room where you fight the Joker. What were they thinking? That's like if you had to fight Superman and before the fight the game gave you a huge chunk of kryptonite. Screw Captain America, Batman is the one whose mighty shield you need to watch out for. Oh, and there's one more change to the game's dialogue at the end of the game. As you're watching the end cutscene and the candy factory explodes, somebody decides to yell, "Doom!" Oh wait, that's supposed to be onomatopoeic for the laser beam hitting the factory. My bad. So that was Batman Beyond Return of the Joker on the Game Boy Color, and, well, it's okay. I wouldn't really call the game good because the game's use of continues pretty much defangs any challenge and stimulation, and the combat is really lacking and repetitive even by 8-bit beat-em-up standards, but at the same time the game is nowhere near bad enough for me to muster any real hate for it. It's leagues better and 3 times longer than the Nintendo 64 version, but it's still nowhere near the great Batman Beyond game that I was hoping for. But you know what? Think about the DLC costumes that are in Batman Arkham City and Injustice. There's no Tim Burton Batman suit, there's no Batman Begins or the Dark Knight suit, even though those are the ones that people are clamoring for, but Batman Beyond is the one that managed to find his way into both games. That gives me hope that the Batman Beyond franchise isn't dead and forgotten yet, and maybe, just maybe, that great game I've been waiting for will still be made someday.